Hey fellow Forest School leaders, we know that when you're out there leading your sessions, things can get a bit messy, and that's part of the beauty of it. But when it comes to your online presence and your branding, it's better to keep things neat and tidy. That's why we're introducing Fiverr, the one-stop destination for all your professional needs. You need a logo that reflects the spirit of your forest school, a website that's inviting as in your outdoor sessions, or maybe you're looking for someone to take care of all those nitty-gritty admin tasks, leaving you with more time to connect with nature and your students. At Fiverr, they've got a talented community of freelancers ready to bring your vision to life. Whether it's graphic design, web development, or any other skill you can imagine, their experts are there to make your forest school branding stand out. Forest school can be messy, but your company branding shouldn't be. Head to Fiverr, that's fiverr.theforestschoolpodcast.com to get started today.
I'm Wem.
And I'm Lewis.
This is the Forest School Podcast.
Let's go!
The Holy King is losing his grip on the land, and the sun will return, so strike up the band. The old King is reborn, and the days are getting long, so join by the fire in this Yuletide song.
Don't pack away your winter coat, light up the fire and take a boat. Don't be an idiot, thinks it's done. You're getting other shades for the springtime sun. The oak king is only a stupid baby. He can keep you warm like gravy. Maybe you remember what happened last year when I got all the way to you before you hear the spring team. Now I know the seasons go in cycles. You can't remember who's making me go cycle. Get out a pen, write on your bum. The coldest days are yet to come.
The Holy King is losing his grip on the land, and the sun will return, so strike up the band. The old King is reborn, and the days are getting long, so join by the fire in this Yuletide song.
Don't pack away your winter coat, light up the fire and take a boat. Only an idiot thinks it's done, getting out the shades for the springtime sun. The oak king is only a stupid baby. He can keep you warm like gravy. Maybe you remember what happened last year when I got all the way to you before you hear the spring tears. Now I know the seasons go in cycles. You can't remember this thing in your cycle. Get out a pen, write on your bum. The coldest days are yet to come.
Did you just say farting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1?
Said Fivington. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Fivington. Oh.
Because I'm whimsical, mate. It's very whimsical over here.
Yeah.
So, what? Come on, you need to tell me, because just before I pressed the button, you were like, "Oh, that's exciting! Press record, go now."
Oh no. Okay. Well, last episode we were talking about basically loose parts, weren't we?
Sure.
Right. And we're going to talk about more today. But so I've just got a little fact about the guy who came up, with loose parts.
Okay.
That's all.
Gotcha.
That's all. So I'll save that for in a minute
Save
because
that.
we had a little contemporary issue. Contemporary issue of the day on the Forest School Podcast.
In a podcast that will last forever and will be irrelevant very soon.
This is the thing. And also very UK centric. So
Sure.
sorry if you live somewhere else.
But do you know what? It's relevant. It's definitely going to be relevant because history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, and all those things that happen in one
Literally
country.
never heard that saying
You
before
know
in my
that?
life.
That's before.
History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. I
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah.
Never heard it.
It might be relevant
Yeah.
to people. We're talking about, I don't know if it has an official name, the attendance campaign. School attendance.
Well, you said you saw something. Can you just talk about that
So I
first?
found I have a little place where I keep little news stories where I'm like, oh, that's not a whole episode, but it is a little juicy nugget maybe to chat about. And I found one that said to like 70% of families who were polled by YouGov said they thought that the pandemic showed that it was okay for children not to go to school 5 days a week. And then I dug into it a bit more, and it drifted quite hard into some things about attendance, and actually it wasn't super relevant anymore to us. But then that led you to say, oh, well, we should talk about the attendance campaign.
Yes.
Which is going on at the moment.
Yes, exactly. So if you're not aware of it, there's government have come up with this, like, there's a series of posters basically, and there's like a photograph of a child, and then there's like a little quote in the top, on it that says, "This morning he had a stomachache, but look at him now. Moments matter, attendance counts." And then it's got the little NHS logo and HM government, the little logo. "This morning she was worried about school, but look at her now." And then it's a child all laughing and smiling and joyful. These adverts have really upset a lot of people who are saying that they're really ableist, that they don't in any way investigate the issues why a lot of children are not attending school, and especially issues that are being faced by children who have additional needs or need support which isn't being met and isn't being given, and that is the reason that they cannot attend school at the moment. And the government seems to be focused on blaming the child, blaming the families, that it's, you need to force them to come to school basically. And there's like story after story of families saying that schools are telling them this, you just need to bring them in kicking and screaming and we'll take it from there. Completely ignoring the fact that lots of these children are experiencing trauma basically about being at school because their needs just aren't being met and the environment isn't right for them. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that whole thing about attendance since COVID, that something like a quarter of teenagers at the moment are considered to be non-attending school on a regular basis, which is huge. And the reasons for that being obviously like really wide ranging, from families and children being more sensitive to illness like coughs and colds and going, oh, it might be COVID, so I won't send them in, or just being like a heightened awareness of that, of health. But also so many families having had their child at home during lockdown and gone, this is where it actually all comes out. This is where, when the child has been away from school, they go, I just don't want to go back there. It was really, really hard for me to be there, and now I've had some time away. Actually, I just cannot go back. And also worries from the child about, having been off and then having to go back and it feeling really different and alien. And also there's not just the social and emotional stuff going on. There is also, we're in the middle of financial turmoil for a lot of families. And so access to if you're not able to fund your bus journey to school, or potentially food is a challenge, or your own working situation as a parent means that you aren't able to get your child there or get your child and all these things that are all these posters and the campaign in general is kind of like, ignore that, head down, just do it now, don't think, exactly, do it. And also they're not really. So the flip side of all of these statements being, but look at them now, and they're all, look, these are pictures of smiling children, but I would throw the word masking in there pretty hard, even if these were like, I can remember as a child being sent to school and having like the most terrible time for maybe days at a time, but in any particular moment, you might have been able to go like, oh, look, they're smiling and laughing with their friends. Like, well, also none of these pictures are of people in classes. They're laughing and joking in between lessons. They're not happy sat in a classroom. These are also, one of these is, this morning he had a runny nose, but look at him now, which is a clear, we've only just got out of a medical pandemic. Could we maybe give ourselves a break for a second? Your kid's got a runny nose. Maybe I know.
Take a moment to go. We'll just see Anyway.
Yeah. That maybe that child is full of anxiety about the fact that they've got a runny nose, and that, they've heard all of the stuff about like illness and how it can be serious and all the
Would
rest
you
of
like
it.
to know a tin foil hat thing in relation to
Yeah,
this?
sure.
So I am plugged in, I'll do some keyboard tapping. Plugged into the home ed networks.
Yeah.
And as well as this campaign going on, there is also some consultancy going on about the legality of home education. And
this comes up every so often, doesn't it?
Well, here we go. You ready for your tinfoil? Unroll it.
I'm ready.
So,
I'm ready.
The options are for this survey are should be allowed in some circumstances, should be allowed at parents' discretion, should never be allowed, or I don't know, right? And people have been looking on, and once you've done your thing, it shows you where the polls are. And someone found almost exactly the same survey question from, so there was already a bit of a thing where people were going, loads of us home ed people have been answering, and it is not shifting 1 point. The percentages on these results are not moving. Then someone I saw found almost an identical poll from 5 years ago with the same percentages, 37%, 43%, and there's a tinfoil moment of how much of this is theatre of we asked people and here's the results. Because it's interesting, because I think it's one of those topics where if your child is not a school refuser, or you're not a home ed, or school refuser is a loaded term, right? But, if your child has no problem attending school, I'm not sure why you would have a particular interest in allowing or disallowing home ed. It seems to be
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's not something that you're going to likely to be in your bonnet about. No. Yeah, I know. It's weird, isn't it? I was just trying to look, because I'm sure I've seen for these, going back to the government adverts, I'm sure I've seen somewhere a petition to, get them taken out or to complain about it. But all I can find is a Twitter handle for #NotASchoolSkiver. So maybe if you want more information about it, you could check that out. I'm not actually a Twitter user, so I don't know what it's like. But yeah, but have a look. I think lots of people feeling frustrated and the government is just clueless, and it's not really.
And it will affect lots of people doing forest school, who do forest school in home ed scenarios, or who do alternative provision or PRU type stuff.
Yeah,
it is relevant to us working in alternative education to have a pulse on these things of going, what's the current agenda? What's being pushed?
Indeed.
But let's park all that for a moment. Loose parts.
Yeah.
Looser parts, I think you decided to call it.
Yeah. Looser parts. Even looser. Get your parts even looser.
Dangerously
so do you know
loose.
The interesting fact I found. Okay, so I said last week I was going to name. I got the first name right of the person who, the word about a phrase, coined the phrase loose parts. Okay. That's the word. Simon Nicholson, artist and architect. What I didn't know was that he is the son of an artist, Ben Nicholson, who I've never heard of, and the sculptor Barbara Hepworth, who I think is amazing. So that's very interesting. I did not know that. And yes, so this is the idea that young children's cultural participation comes from having access to open-ended loose part materials that can be transformed in different ways. And last time we talked about what did we talk about?
We went through
stuff and things.
The Bob Hughes play types, and we discussed how they might be beneficial for each of those play types. I have a question though that's just come up from something you just said. Can you read that description of the term as it was coined again?
Sure. Well, this is from a website, louisapenfold.com, just because I just put in Simon Nicholson, so it came up first. In 1972, Simon Nicholson presented the idea that young children's cultural participation comes from the presence of open-ended loose part materials that can be transformed in different ways. So yeah, his idea was about cultural participation, which
That's
is
interesting. Okay, so there's two parts in there. I do want to dig into the cultural participation thing because I think that is interesting. But
yes. Can I interrupt you
you
1 second
already
to
have.
say a bit more? Okay, sorry, I have, haven't I? It's bad. Sorry, but just to give a bit more context to that, his article was called "The Theory of Loose Parts: An Important Principle for Design Methodology." This theory rejects the idea that creativity is characteristic of a select few. So,
Okay.
yeah. Nicholson claimed that people have been misled to think that creating artworks and buildings is so difficult that only highly gifted people can do it. In opposition to this, Nicholson argues that all people, including young children, are capable of participating in the construction of culture. The more flexibility a material or a space has, the more opportunities these variables have for children's creative experimentation. In any environment, both the degree of inventiveness, creativity, and the possibility of discovery are directly proportional to the number and kind of variables in it, says Nicholson, 1972.
That's interesting. I was watching something
Yes.
yesterday about a sculptor who does what might be sort of people put their nose up as like, anyone could have done that. They piled 9 buckets of sand in a gallery and pushed them over, and then where the sand lies, they're like, that's the exhibit, or I think they just did that. One was like fireworks on an office chair and it span around.
Fun.
Yeah, but their whole point, thesis, whatever you want to call it, the underpinning was like, when people see fantastic works of art, like sculptures and things, they are so far removed from seeing the process of like raw block of marble, the rough hewing that one person had to do, the all these steps that they get convinced that this is something that they could not do, rather than seeing the work through. And it's almost a process product type thing. And so that's interesting to think that loose parts is a way of making the process transparent. Yeah. I was wondering about thinking, because you said about children accessing the world, and I was thinking about, that it's sort of a stereotype of like the creative startup company, and it's like this office space in America, and they've got like beanbags and ping pong tables and all this stuff.
And a slide.
Right. Yeah. But do you think you've ever been, that you would genuinely change a workspace if you had loose parts in it for everything? If you had loose parts that you could use to explain your budget, and you had like loose parts that you were like in the meeting room, if you were going to explain where the clients were and how you were going to access them, that you could dig into a box of Lego and go, they're here, and we're going to build a channel this way, and we're going to access the, like, there's something there about loose parts not just being increasing the creativity of children, but as lots of things in adult workspaces are single function. They're the opposite of loose parts.
You're just making me think now. You're making me think of how, like, yes, I think it would, definitely. And people already do it. So, when you've been in a conversation with like either a colleague or a friend, and they start using just whatever is around them to illustrate their point. They go, I've got this cup. Okay, this coffee cup is, imagine that's him. And I'm here. And, and that we do that, which is quite a specific thing about like explaining, isn't it? But I was also thinking about forest school leader training and how often we invite our participants and to use loose parts in order to kind of process thinking or present learning. We do that so often, and I've never really made the connection that is still like loose parts play, because it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we might ask them to kind of illustrate, even if it's talking about like forest layers and things like that, like we're going to make a representation of, it's almost like creating a piece of art, isn't it? But it's or storytelling and making a story map and using things, and
so I have a question for you then about variety of loose parts and how important do you think, how important do you think, because we went through those play types and we went through like this one would really help with this and this is what typically helps with that, but if you're talking about things like explaining or that creative thing of like processing some information, and you give people a task and say, maybe could you make a small world thing or so, something about, the children in a session are making a small world, let's say. How important do you think it is that there are, in terms of loose parts in the forest, not just a big pile of wood cookies, even if those are organic, different sizes and shapes, because we talked about that last time, I won't go into it again, but the fact that when you're in a small world space, you could use leaves or sticks or mud or something else, or, do you think that's super important to getting the creativity out, or do you think that doesn't really make much difference?
Do you mean having different choices of loose parts?
Yeah, that you might have multiple people doing small worlds, say making a map of an area, but where one person uses predominantly sticks and another person goes, well, I drew it in the mud. Well, do you think that's important?
Yeah.
Or do you think you would get a similar result if you... Because I guess the alternative is that kind of thing of like, we are all making small world. You need four sticks to do this. It's still loose parts, but it's potentially not the same way.
But much more prescriptive. I think that we are naturally drawn towards different types of loose parts. And I think that might change through our life or depending what mood we're in. But I think denying people access to parts that they might be drawn to and go like, I'm going to put a constraint on this that it has to be. Like, it depends what you're doing, doesn't it? Like, that you might play a game.
Say
like
more about the denying access to something, because that unlocks some thoughts.
Well, the activity you just described was, now, children, we are all going to make a small world thing, and you need 4 sticks, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Like, that's quite prescriptive, and that's not something that we would often do. But then I was just thinking, I have seen people play quite fun games where you go, I've got a challenge for you. If you want to accept, like, how, make a tall tower only using sticks that are this length or whatever. So it's like the constraint is part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point to it so that, like, it can extend creativity because of the constraint.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've only got this, I'm only allowed to use this type of resource. I now need to think more creatively about how I can use that thing. So maybe I can put it vertically instead of horizontally, or maybe I can prop it up against this thing. And
that
so it encourages
the thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, in the sort of lateral thinking.
What about then times where, because I think you could argue that there is I'm not sure if it's a headspace or an age or a developmental stage at which learners see everything as loose parts. And that can often be like a super challenging point, because for all of the joys of like, oh my God, you've used that saucepan as a helmet, that's incredible. I wouldn't have thought of doing that, or you've brought this thing into this game. There's also the flip side of like, I have emptied the handbag because this is all loose parts, and I see the world as loose parts.
Yeah.
Dad's socks are loose parts. The cat's litter tray is loose parts. Do you think that's a headspace that you get in and out of, or do you think that's like a moment in time developmentally?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, you hear so many stories of like parents going, yeah, I used to have a really beautiful pair of earrings, but now one of them is buried in the garden, or like wedged in a tiny crack in the wall, or because their 3-year-old just been like, yep, I need that.
This is my little
project. I've just realised what I need. I need to go and get it. Yes. I'm trying to think about like how we might have seen that at forest school, and whether, some people, that's really interesting, isn't it? That there's like almost an unspoken agreement between us all that we understand that these are loose parts and these aren't. These are a separate thing. Like these are tools or something. I think sometimes we do have that. We do
move
have
in the grey areas there, I think, because sometimes there are times where like someone might be doing something with a spade, let's say, and one adult, whether that's a parent or a leader, might go, oh, don't do that. That's for digging, because their mindset is that this is a thing for digging. It serves a function. And then you might have another adult, leader, parent involved going, well, it's all right, isn't it? They're not breaking it. They're not, that they're just doing the thing. And so, yeah, it's an interesting grey area that I think some people don't necessarily acknowledge, that the learning is in that grey, that how much learning goes into that grey area of developing and facilitating play in a way that, like, as a leader, I think one of the things that makes you feel very safe is when you know a group knows which parts of the environment are loose and which parts are like
Fixed.
well, I was thinking that, and then because I was thinking about, in our woods, it might be right now there are loads of Christmas trees to play with, and that's big loose parts, and it's amazing. But other times of the year, it's been like that's actually the loose part that's clearly defining the path. So that's not loose parts for you, and so, but you feel much more secure when you know the group. I think when I know the group knows trees that are on the, sticks that are on there, they're fine for den building. Sticks that are over here, that's our bug hotel. And learning that the difference between those things.
Yeah, and that's part of the relationship with the environment, isn't it? That we have historically found that very difficult when we have participants who come and visit our site once and they know that they could never come back, like a birthday party or a school trip or whatever, that already they interact with it in a way that is, whoa, everything's fair game. Use everything, and everything is loose parts. Like, so they arrive with that sort of approach to the environment already, and then also it's more difficult to explain from us to them when we're trying to explain why that isn't actually accessible right now, but this is, because they don't have that long-term relationship. They haven't seen, for example, the bluebells in the spring and therefore understand why the wall of Christmas trees is in this place right now to stop us trampling the bulbs of the bluebells that you can't even see. Or, oh, do you remember I told you about the toddler group who built that the other day, and therefore that's why we're not going to dismantle it right now. So I think that goes, and that's a really valid point to make, because somebody might be listening to this podcast, or somebody might have investigated the theory of loose parts and gone, oh, brilliant, I'm going to bring this idea to this one-off event that I'm going to do on a school field, and I'm going to bring all this stuff with me or whatever. Because what we haven't talked about is the kind of flip side, the challenges of loose parts in terms of managing them, where they end up, how I have definitely collected loads of pine cones, collected loads of sticks, and brought them to a school field. It sounds insane. You feel insane when you're doing it. You're like, what is my job? I'm literally collecting sticks and I'm putting them in my van, and then I'm going to put them on another bit of grass so that kids can play with them. What is this world? This is mental. And
they're all gone in 10 minutes. They are across the school field.
And especially so if it's a one-off event and you're like, well, that's, I've got no relationship with these kids. They've got no relationship with this place, all the loose parts. And so, yeah, they might have had an amazing time that session, and it may have inspired them to do all kinds of things when they're away from you and that place, and which is great. So it's not to say don't do it, it's a waste of time. It's just that the expectations of the group are going to be different, and your expectations therefore need to be different.
How do you think your relationship with, there's some parts here and I want to pull them together. So we talked last time about one of the key components of loose parts being an abundance, there is lots of the thing, and choice of how you use those things, and then I think the third thing that I want to bring in is tidying or resetting. So what do you think? Because I think my journey with those three things has definitely been one that I'm probably still on. I think some people would have very strong views about tidying up is part of the playing, tidying up at the end of the session. Getting pine cones is a bad example, but let's say and it goes more so if you've spent money on those wood cookies from, you've dropped 40 quid, let's say, on some nice beech wood cookies, and then that lovely soft yellow colour, and you're like, okay, that has a financial implication, and therefore tidying up has to be part of this loose parts play, because I can't facilitate it over and over again. it's then a different game if you come the following time and it's like, are all those wood cookies there? Yeah, they are. They're spread out over the whole site. Do you want to collect them? No, I didn't really want to do collecting. That's not the schema that I'm in. I wanted to do like just transaction money. I wanted to just do that bit. Where do you think you are right now in terms of that idea of resetting loose parts? Do you think that's like super important and your job?
Right. There's so much in there.
Okay.
My brain is like little fireworks everywhere. I flipping love this so much. Okay. So the first thing that sprung to mind when you were saying that is I was like, this reminds me of something. What is it? Okay, it's the end of evolutionary playwork by Bob Hughes, the mighty tome, which has kneel before it as it glows and shines. At the end, he writes some particularly on purpose provocative questions to think about.
Sure.
And one of them is, which I always want to talk about, how do you, it's something I'm getting the wording
Paraphrasing.
How do you marry the feeling that you want children to help tidy the play space, own the play space, have respect for the play space, with a play worker's approach should be to facilitate self-directed, intrinsically motivated, free choice play? How do you marry those things? And again, you could load more in there in terms of which we've talked about before. Like our role as educators or adults working with children is to try to instill some values that are like about sustainability or about respect for the environment and respect for stuff and respect for our time and all of those things that, you know, we have this kind of moral. It's the moral compass stuff, isn't it? About like it's our job to be guides around that kind of world rather than just being really what's the word, you know, lax, permissive, that's the word. So that sprung to mind.
Okay.
And I could talk about that all day, like that'd be a whole like podcast
That's a
episode.
whole
I would say that again, you know how we talk about when we know a group and we know them really well, then we feel able and we have the relationship with them that can stand this approach, which is that we are able to talk about ourselves and our own needs. And I say that I would think that we are there with all of our groups at the moment where, for example, I have harvested, like this is a real example, I have collected loads of hazelnuts or acorns, and the reason I've done that is because I'd really like to play this particular game where we're going to pretend to be jays and we're going to go and hide the hazelnuts. Obviously they're like brown, they're really hard to see.
That's part of the game.
It's part of the game, and I'd really like to be able to play this game again tomorrow. So the part of the game is that we might forget where we've put something. That's absolutely fine, like no pressure, but I would really love at the end when we finish playing with them if they could all go back in this basket. I'd be so appreciative if that could happen, because it took me ages to find them all or something like that. Like I feel comfortable that I can express that and I can go, here are your potential needs for playing with them, so I'm gonna like address those and go, they're clearly really fun to play with, we're going to play with them in this way or whatever. I would love them back at the end. And I think there's quite a few times where I've done that, where I might have brought something from home and gone, yes, we can use these or whatever in whatever way you want, but please can we have them back? In terms of like, I think there's got to be, we're talking about like variety of loose parts. I think there have to be some loose parts that you care less about. I think if every single loose part you bring or you sort of enable, if every single time you bring some new loose part or you will draw attention to some new loose part, you're saying, and the caveat is that you always have to put this all back, or you have to make sure that they're only used in this area, or you have to make sure that they're only used in this way. If you do that every single time, I think that just like kills the joy. I think there's got to be enough variety and enough abundance of some loose parts that are allowed to go anywhere, that you do like for example, our pots and pans from the mud kitchen, like we allow those to go anywhere. We check them to make sure they're not falling apart, so there's not like bits and pieces all over the place, and then you and I will kind of view it and go, do those need to be reset for the next session, or are they actually okay to stay at the
Are
bottom
they
of
a
the hill
different
right now?
springboard
Because
now
exactly,
they're over there? That's interesting. Woohoo.
exactly,
Yeah.
yes. And it's one of those things that, you know, because sometimes we look at the woods after a session or the beginning of a new one and go, oh my god, like arriving here as a new group and seeing like all the tops over there and all the pans over there looks like bum and sticks, and it looks really unappealing and looks like we don't care. So we will
Absolute bum
reset
and stick
everything.
shirt available on the podcast store. Buy yours now.
Exactly. And sometimes we go, no, actually, I'm going to leave that there to see how the group interacts with it as a springboard, as you say. So I think it depends.
Yeah.
In short, it depends. Yeah. Does that make sense? How do you think how do you feel about loose parts? Are there things that like give you the slight heebie-jeebies and things?
Well, I think my relationship with like resetting loose parts is, like you say, dependent on what the loose part is, how available it is to become a different springboard and a different place, and also how replaceable, but not necessarily in a financial sense, because sometimes a bucket of pine cones is replaceable, not from a financial sense, but from the time that I put into that is not super, great. So
Conkers, on the other hand.
Oh, well, that's because we don't have horse chestnut
Exactly.
trees in our woods, so they are a different resource. And I think this is touching on, like we said, we did a whole episode a little while ago about, conditional gifts and how things are presented to a group. I think there is something, when you have a loose part, do you think there is more so than with other tools, an idea that those things have less ownership? I'm struggling to get to the words, but like if I give someone a hammer because they're like, I want to do some hammers and nails, I don't think they in any way would turn around and go, great, my hammer now, I'm free to do with what the hammer, whatever I now choose. I could take this hammer home, I could decorate the hammer, I could put googly eyes on it and go, hello, Mrs. Hammer, would you like to come for tea? But things that we would define as loose parts, inherently there's something about them being more transferable and like mine now. Which speaks to that like foraging, high, collecting. I've got all the chestnuts, but also there's a like unspoken expectation of like you hand someone a hand. Recently we've been using pine cones as money. If I gave someone 5 pine cones as money, I would not in any way expect, and I think it would be weird if you went around at the end of it, all the money I gave you, could you make sure it came back in? Because in that play world, in that play cycle, the way that you play with loose parts is transferring ownership a lot of the time, in a way that you don't necessarily do that with tarps or balls or costumes. Do you know what I mean? I wonder if something about transferring ownership is a key part to this loose parts puzzle.
Yeah, and also that thing about taking things home, and like there's so much learning, isn't there? In terms of like the chat we were just having about, or that loose part is available, and that one that looks the same but is performing a function right now isn't available, and you've got to learn the nuances. I think it's similar with loose parts, that there's so much unspoken stuff about that is so nuanced about, this is the type of loose part that lives here all the time, but this is a loose part that I can take, like sticks. So you'll get kids going, can I like take this stick home?
Yeah.
And it's almost like, I'm sure different forest schools have like different policies that they've maybe written down about these. It's like, and how big your site is and how often it's used and stuff, that if you, I'm sure some people have got a policy about like, no, we don't even let kids take sticks home, because if we let every kid who wanted to take a stick home, we would literally have no sticks. And various other reasons.
That's not wrong. That's just a choice you have to make depending on your thing. That's,
absolutely. Absolutely right. Yeah. And that kids will ask that question quite often. And sometimes, when you're like, you hear a question, sometimes you think, I'm kind of slightly surprised that they've asked that, because I would maybe
Take it
with
as
my
given.
that I would take it as given that of course you can take that home because you've like made it or you've spent
Right.
time,
Okay.
you know. But then other times, like it isn't obvious to them, is what I'm trying to say. Like,
Yeah.
do you agree? There are sometimes that kids ask you a question and the answer is actually, well, no, actually, because I need to. That belongs to the woods, and we need to be able to use it again. And then sometimes the answer is, well, yeah, of course, like that's yours now. And that those lines that we might consider to be obvious as an adult often aren't obvious to a child, which is an interesting thing. I was also, as you were talking there, thinking about the vibe of the value or the preciousness of the object. And I was thinking about things like cushions and blankets, which are a loose part that I'm really interested in, because it's one of those things that if you were setting up a forest school, you would never think, oh, and of course, I need 20 cushions and 15 blankets, of course.
Yeah.
Not for any reason, not for like first aid reasons or welfare reasons. We need these to be able to play with. But blimmin' hell, they're some of the most often used and requested loose parts that we have amongst certain people. And I was thinking about, there's something about the fact that those items are very cheap, or we got them for free. Like the blankets were donated to us, or they were just super cheap. The cushions similarly, like
they're big
they came from like
blankets, aren't they? For people who are trying to imagine the type of blankets we've got, it's like the ones you would give to a newborn because they can't.
Or like they're crocheted
Granny
granny square blankets.
Yeah.
Which and the cushions are like old sofa cushions that people have donated, or they're like super cheap from the sale in IKEA or whatever. And I was just thinking about if they were more precious, if we decided we need cushions for the benches for some people who would be uncomfortable, and we're going to spend some money then, and we want them to stay nice. And so, yes, you know, something about the vibe with which you hand something over, or do they have to ask for it, or is it in a place where they can get to it themselves? Like, what has a barrier to access? And not just a barrier, but the vibe with which you hand it over, even in your body language, even if you don't say anything, even if it's like, yes, you can have some cushions for your den, but blimmin' hell, I hope you don't track mud all over it. Or like literally
wanging a cushion across the...
Don't care. Do whatever the heck you want with it. Put it up a tree, paint it with mud. Like that vibe, I think, changes the play. And I don't always actually mean that it's that it changes the play for the better if you're really casual about it. I think also there is value in like, yes, we're allowed to play with these things, but they're quite special, and therefore, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that it's always good, but I do think that there should definitely be some things which you don't care about very much.
And it's just occurred to me as well, you're saying about the vibe with which you give them, the vibe in which ways are stored, and the unspoken. So we talked about loose parts, and a key component to them being loose parts is that they are, I was going to say malleable. That's not the word that I mean.
Open-ended.
No. You know, with wood cookies, for example, you can stack them, you can press them into mud, you can...
I'd call that open-ended. Call that open-ended.
But what I mean is that they're available to be used in a mixed media way. The plastic pizza from a plastic pizza set is not to be used with the hammers and nails, whereas wood cookies, pine cones can move around these spaces. But, and here's an interesting thought, this is part of maybe my issues, one of my issues with like tough trays and beautiful looking settings that are like, here how we've set things up for play. And I agree with the idea that you need to be able to see the resources and all these things. However, if I know, hypothetically, I'm pretending I'm 4 now, right? If I know that at the end of the session I will be asked to tidy things away, and I know that the chestnuts go into a wicker basket, I now don't think I'm as inclined to get those chestnuts covered in mud or wet paint or to crack them open, because the way that I'm going to have to store them back at the end if you've got muddy stuff, it goes like, oh God.
Yeah.
So then you were talking about the blankets and cushions, and quite often our groups will see blankets and cushions hung up on essentially a washing line in the kitchen, because we're going, yeah, someone else left it out in the rain or it's on the thing. But they know that with those resources, there is an option to have them like cleaned and processed before they go back to being reset. And that's often one of the things that I think, in terms of that whole loose parts, open-ended, free choice reset, whose job is it to tidy? Well, it depends what your expectations are around tidy. If your expectations are that those wood cookies are going to come back perfectly clean because the way you're going to expect them is in a nice wicker basket to be placed next to the fire pit and on those things, you're going to get very different. So I'm not trying to put not judgments on the different things, because there are valid reasons for doing these things, but you will get very different types of play versus like, here's an old military kit bag where all the ropes come out of. At the end of the session, you'll bung them back in the military kit bag type thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
That presentation of things going in and out.
Yeah.
I think...
Sorry, I'm getting a bit distracted by my cat who's trying to walk all over the keyboard.
Everywhere.
I've got cat problems. Yes. And yeah, I didn't really answer your question earlier about like tidying up. And yeah, whose job it is. I think you're absolutely right that if somebody knows they are going to have to tidy something up, then they're less likely to engage in it in an honest,
okay, so can I spread this out
way.
Can I spread this out slightly further then?
Yeah.
Because we all most of us live in shared accommodation with partners and or children. Do you think that... Oh, there's a cat. Do you think that, that example of like the things go in the nice wicker basket and they look nice and they've done the thing?
Yeah.
Do you think there's also something that is like a genuine life skill of like knowing how people you live with expect things to be tidied away, and how that affects, like, in our house, I might take the blender as an example, because the blender is a bloody nightmare to clean. But I know that depending on which of us is about to use the kitchen or something, one of us might be okay with it being full of water and being left to soak, and some of us are like, well, that needs to be upside down on the draining board so that it gets all cleaned out. And some people will be like, well, no, if it's not dried with a tea towel and put back in the thing, in the cupboard, then you haven't finished tidying yet. And that loose parts exist in the adult world. Loose parts are cushions on your sofa that you have rearranged for your little comfy wallow while you binge on the TV, but maybe you don't move them back, or, how the cutlery goes away, or like those kind of, and again, like you're saying, the vibes of how you give those things over, like, is it all right if I use your, I don't know, iPad stand for a minute? The vibe with which you give over those things is not just a toddler group play space, thing consideration. It's a thing that carries on into your adult relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's really healthy to have spaces where you have to be like considerate of things, and like where they live, how they're treated, how clean they are, all that schmizzle, and spaces where that is less important. I think it's so important, and to be able to have access to spaces where you can move stuff around, you can leave it here, you can get it dirty, you can lick it. No one's gonna tell you off or be disappointed in your actions, especially those of us who are neurodivergent, who might really struggle with the executive function demands of the first thing I just described. So things being looked after, things being in the place that you expect them to be, things not being forgotten or left out in the rain, or what, So if you are a person who quite frequently is made to feel shame, or just self-induced shame through one's own neglect of items, that you can hang out somewhere where that shit is less important is a joy. It's a flipping joy.
Definitely. That's
if
okay.
if you can trade a work environment, for example, like going into a work environment.
Oh yeah. Let me try and imagine for a second. Hang on.
If you can,
Hang on. I've got it. I think I can imagine. Yeah.
If you could, my dog is barking because I'm awake. If you can trade a work environment from, sorry, who last had the stapler? You know, the big stapler for displays. Who last had that?
Yeah.
No, definitely not. No, definitely not me. Definitely. Are you sure? And who? Is anyone? You know my code card for the photocopier. Like, where is that now? You know. And you know, like the year 10 books. Like, where are they? You can swap a working environment from that to, I don't know, some sticks over there. There's a pile of pens just in that box, maybe.
Yeah.
Lids, maybe. Don't know.
Yeah. Well, This is any time we have something happening, like level 3s, or like people coming to visit the woods, and we have to tidy the cabin. I think it's at least 10 or 15 times we go, this! I was looking for this! Do you remember I asked you where it was? And then the other one of us can go, oh yeah, I was talking to that person and they asked me for string, and so I put that down there under that for a minute, and that was in March. So
Exactly. And that also the learning and the ability that if you want something that you have about your person that is really useful and you want it back, you've got to either put it on literally a cord that attaches to your belt.
Let's just get. This is just like grievances now.
You write not just your name on the item, but a bright yellow kind of flippity floppity label that's like bigger than the actual thing.
You see, don't give my stuff back. And so I have my lighter on a string.
That's why you have to do it. Do you remember the Sharpies though? The Sharpies.
Yeah.
You even gave me my own Sharpies with the flippy flappy labels on them.
It worked great, didn't it? You've never borrowed a Sharpie from me since. Not once, not ever.
But the Sharpies, my Sharpies with the flippy flappy labels are not in my pocket. They're at home. They're not available for my use. Oh!
Loose parts pens. Looser pens.
You opened this can of worms by talking about your blender. That sounded like a very personal little. I was like, okay, who is it? It's Juniper, right? It's your 4-year-old going. If it's not dried up with the tea towel and put away, then.
No, it's just whichever of us is in the tidying jag. You know, and that happens at work as well. One person gets in a tidying jag, possibly mid-session, and just goes, I need to put all of this away now.
Yes.
But they're playing. You can't do the thing. I'm so sorry. I need to tidy.
It's gone into overwhelm. No, too much mess. Yeah, too much mess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. Loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
Right. Bye.
Bye.